Hey guys, Zeteo here. Today we're going to be doing some more Alpha Cup casting. We're looking at the losers finals of the AlphaCupV. This is between Autopilot and Blodir. And the loser of this will get third place, and the winner will move on to the grand finals to face off against X Factor. This is in fact also a rematch between these players. Blodir has in fact knocked down Autopilot into the losers brackets. And, Blodir just lost to X Factor in the semifinals winners brackets. But yeah, let's get into it.
Game started.
All right, so we got at the bottom right, we have our blue Cortex player, Autopilot. And at the top left, we have Blodir spawned as our red Armada player. I want to talk a little bit about these starting positions on Feast of Hades, because they are a bit different here. Autopilot being Cortex and in the corner, I believe he'll probably be going with a Cortex vehicle lab here. This position is just a little bit easier to defend early on. You only have these two ramps, and your opponent has to cross up this high ground to get to your base, so it makes it a little bit easier to do something like vehicles, who don't have a lot of aggression early on, primarily just relying on scouts as they build up, a force of incisors. Incisors are a bit more expensive than pawns and ticks, so it takes a little bit longer to build up enough to actually be able to go across the map, and they're also a little bit better in higher numbers against pawns. So we'll just have to, see how this plays out here. But yeah, it looks like, Autopilot, opening up with a con, a couple of rascals, another con, and then, moving straight into incisors and maybe some more scouts as well. Blodir, meanwhile, with the Armada bot lab, going with a con first, going into ticks to scout, lay down some pressure, and then probably going straight into a second con, and then eventually, of course, some pawns. Pawns are a lot cheaper than incisors. They deal a lot of damage, but incisors have significant range on those pawns, and if they are microed well in numbers, incisors can deal with pawns pretty easily, assuming that they are like running back away from the pawns. It makes it very difficult for the pawns to catch those incisors and deal their damage. But yeah, it looks like Blodir, added on this construction turret rather early, able to move his commander out rather quickly, and this is going to allow him to start adding on some metal extractors very, very quickly here. 300 build power, certainly, a very good amount, compared to constructors that only have 80. So certainly going to be expanding a little bit faster because of that. It looks like Autopilot, his commander's still on the base, still cranking out units with, boosting that lab. Very important, to keep boosting out whatever you need. But yeah, getting that second constructor out as both of them go on to expand. Actually, this one's expanding and coming back, and I wonder if Autopilot is going to be actually adding on a third con here. That's certainly a lot. I think just kind of seeing how much pressure is being applied to him, he can maybe get away with having the third con, assuming that he defends just right with these rascals roaming around. Actually, it looks like, okay, so his commander is now moving out. Just boosting the lab with the single con. Remember, the second con is coming back to boost as well, so that's certainly going to be a reasonable amount of build power. So having his commander, come out here and grab some maxes is certainly going to boost his economy a bit faster than if he had used, just a single constructor with that. Tick gets in the back of the base, takes out a mechs. It's going to start turning off these solar collectors, and that's certainly a hassle, but nothing too substantial. He can rebuild that. A couple ticks try to get in here as well, but there are, plenty of defenders here for this con, so no damage dealt there. But yeah, another tick tries to come in here too, sees the commander move out, and decides to head back. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, Blodir just going out, expanding, his con still out there expanding, grabbing these clusters of 3 mexes, and then, moving on towards the center here. And this is a really strong, play to have here. It is very important on this map to have your commander, more in the center of the map, so that you can start to like choke this off, make it hard for units to come through here, and then you only have to really worry about the other, the further away, ways to get into your base. So certainly a nice move here. I wonder if Autopilot's going to be doing the same thing. It looks like, yeah, basically the same thing, but starting with this, this expansion, moving on here, grabbing these and then continuing on towards the center. So they will probably bump heads here, as the game progresses. But for now, both players just kind of sitting back doing a bit more of a macro play here. But yeah, lots of pawns start to come out. Certainly, initially, the player that opens bots has a little bit more initiative. They can kind of get across the map with more units and apply pressure in various locations, and it makes it very difficult for incisors, to be everywhere because they are a bit more expensive. But I think with Autopilot's early move out with his commander to start grabbing those mexes, it's certainly going to help, field a lot more incisors here. So I think he'll be sitting okay, but there is a bit of damage going down. Tick does take out that extractor here in the corner, so he's going to have to rebuild that. And, also, there is no res bot out here because he opened vehicles. So, can't pick up any Rex from mexes, so he has to get a con over there to replace it. This mex gets taken out once again. Kind of annoying, but, again, this is like really close to his base. It's not too difficult to just get a constructor over there, to rebuild those mexes when possible. Looks like there are a couple of rascals in the back of Blodir's base as well, taking out some of these extractors. And I think this is a bigger deal here because, these rascals, they're turning off these solars, and that's certainly makes it difficult for Blodir to have enough energy. But at the same time, rebuilding some of these mexes are a little bit further away from the base. So it's a little bit more difficult for the cons to get over there to rebuild those mexes. We do see some pawns trying to get in here. The commander shuts it down. Plenty of incisors out here, and soon, I don't know if this is enough damage from Blodir with these pawns, because the tides are going to be changing here as the incisor count grows. Yeah, in fact, it looks like Autopilot now sending out these incisors, and this is like a significant number of incisors here. 8 incisors going across the map now, and the aggression is kind of turning from being on Autopilot to being on Blodir. So these incisors are certainly going to be a sizable force for Blodir to deal with. But there are a lot of pawns coming out here. He knows that this is going to be a bit of a problem. So, just add on lots of pawns to deal with this. So both players going to need to be rather careful with this, though. Losing all those incisors for Autopilot, is going to be a big deal. That's going to be a lot of Rex and things for Blodir to have, since they did open bots. But they should trade a little bit better than these pawns, right? So, it's really going to come down to macro here, or a micro here. And it's really important that these incisors don't just straight up go and like hug these pawns. They want to skirt them. They want to be, at a distance because the incisors have some extra range. So you noticing the movement here, sees the pawn, starts moving this way so that they are more parallel. And if he needs to, he can move the incisors back out this way with that. So, it's really important for these incisors to circle around. Looks like they get a little bit caught. Autopilot, sees an opportunity to run in here, but the incisors are now moving back. Going to be trading a little bit better. It's really hard for these pawns to get some nice, flanking damage going on. So far, the engagement going pretty well for Autopilot, but very importantly, he also wants to keep these incisors alive and generate threats on this on this right-hand side. And the longer he keeps these alive, the longer these pawns need to be over here, to defend this. The longer that these pawns can't be moving across the map to apply pressure. So this is going to allow Autopilot to safely expand behind this. Lots of incisors now also, being balled up here, going to be going down the left-hand side here. And so, with these incisors at the top still being alive, that's more pressure on Blodir. They might run into the commander here, but, certainly can turn around in time before they get degunned. And, that's going to allow Autopilot to maybe circle around this hill, go into the base that way, apply pressure that way, and make it very difficult for Blodir to, respond to that. It's just going to be a lot of incisors, in multiple locations, and having multiple balls roaming the map is certainly going to be really good for Autopilot. So do we see any transitions yet? We do not. Just, just our opener lab here, or opener factories here. But yeah, these incisors still posing a threat. These pawns need to respect it. looks like they are going to take out this constructor, and that's certainly a big deal because it's going to be very difficult to get another, con out here, especially if these incisors continue to live and apply pressure. So Blodir not doing quite as good of a job as maybe, they could be doing. Need to be really careful with your pawns and making sure that your opponent doesn't get free damage like that. But at the same time, each engagement is leaving behind these incisor wrecks, and that allows Blodir to pick them up and get a bigger army, right? So Autopilot now, feeling a bit of pressure on this left-hand side, just with all these pawns out, and also, there's a couple of incisors with them as well. Meanwhile, the incisors on the left-hand side engaging with these pawns, and this is a significant force. This is going to be very difficult for Blodir to, deal with all this. Yeah, all these pawns running up here. Bots can run up this hill, vehicles cannot, so they're going to be able to kind of get on this position here, take out those mexes. Could be a bit of a bit annoying to deal with to, get another con out there to retake them. But meanwhile, the incisors have dealt some damage here, taking out a solar collector, taking out these mexes, turning off some of these solar collectors, and even like being strong enough that they continue on forward, up this hill, maybe deal some damage in the back of Blodir's base here. Some Banshees come out, and I feel like this is a weird transition in a way because, you don't really want to do this transition when your opponent is pushing incisors at your base. Like, Banshees aren't the greatest defensive unit. They're going to be able to chip away at this, but at the same time, this is going to allow the incisors to deal damage, whereas if this was pawns, they could deal with it a little bit better. But certainly, overall, Banshees are a reasonable play, going to be able to apply some pressure in locations like this. I guess, there are some pawns out here already anyways, but, just being able to hit some of those, like, outlying expansions, because it's rather annoying having to build, static defenses at all your different, throughout the map. Like, it's kind of a lot of money if you do that. So it looks like Autopilot, instead choosing to go with fighters. Those fighters can, of course, be anywhere on the map rather quickly with their, really high speed, and then, deal with the Banshees pretty easily when it comes to that. But yeah, those Banshees certainly going to force out, some anti-air. But yeah, at the same time, I think Autopilot in a pretty good position here with all these incisors, kind of a lot of incisors. Taking out another con, certainly a big deal. And I don't know if there's enough ground forces to really deal with this. The Banshees are here dealing damage. I think that the fighters are coming in here to try to take out those Banshees, but there are plenty of fighters for Blodir here, so the defense, is going to be good. Meanwhile, it looks like the incisors doing bits of damage, to these Banshees, and, they're slowly getting picked off here. So I don't know. I think this is a rather tricky, position. Despite that, these incisors, there's just enough of them that they can possibly run up this hill, do some more damage, take out those mexes, and again, it's rather annoying to have to rebuild those. So looking at the big picture here, I think Blodir, in not as much or not as good of a position here, especially since Autopilot was able to take these mexes in the center here. 3.0 mexes are certainly a bit bigger, 50% bigger than the rest of the mexes on this map. So, it's certainly a nice little bonus to have, and then having these exploiters on the outskirts here means it's going to be very difficult for Blodir to apply pressure. And they just have so many hit points that running through like this means that this incisor is still going to be intact, the constructor is still going to be intact, and it's just rather difficult to apply pressure in this region. Shuriken's coming out now, and that's another nice thing about Goring's Cortex. You just have these units that can just shut down these attacks like this. Like, sure, like, they get taken out pretty easily, so in some ways, they are a little bit more of a one-time use unit if they get taken out. But for now, being able to shut this down pretty easily is a really nice benefit to have for Cortex here. But yeah, looking at this top location here, this top left position, I don't see any resbots out yet to reclaim those or resurrect them rather. I guess it's just the resbots are a little bit. Well, I guess one of them's idle. The rest of them picking up stuff in this location. But yeah, we have a transition into vehicles. So No more res bots, just going to rely on the ones that he has so far. And I think this is a reasonable, thing to do as your opponent is gearing up to go medium tanks and whatnot. Pawns start to be not as effective because these medium tanks just have so much more hit points. They have a bit of splash as well, so pawns that are grouped together in sizable numbers don't do as well. And, it's going to be a little bit better to have that combined arms of some pawns and some tanks. So I think together the pawns and the tanks can deal with this, but, Blodir needs to get into position and worry about it a bit, because that is a lot of medium tanks. And Size is also coming up here, but there are maybe plenty of blitzes to deal with it. I don't know. Some of these are kind of hurt, so, maybe not as much as you'd want. There is another force down at the bottom, bottom left position here. But yeah, they see the medium tanks, decide not to engage quite right now. Don't want to leave Rex behind on Autopilot's side of the map. And yeah, looking at this top center position, we have, again, it's a lot of pawns, a lot of medium tanks, some incisors as well. And I think just this combined force here is going to be a nice, nice spread out way to deal with this line of medium tanks. Just the extra bonus flanking damage from the pawns and blitzes certainly help out a lot. And it looks like, oh, look at this ball of medium tanks from Autopilot. These medium tanks of Blodir getting some extra damage in for it. And I think he's going to be able to clean this up rather easily, rather efficiently. And that's going to leave a lot of Rex here for Autopilot. And I think he certainly, for Blodir. And I think Blodir certainly needs that, as they're a little bit behind in terms of, map control here. Not able to do enough pressure early on with those pawns. And, Autopilot just doing a good job, keeping his cons alive and expanding. So, the pressure's on Blodir to be able to deal some damage back, or at least, at the very least, take out these attacking units, to keep up his own expansions, but also to get some Rex, resurrected so that he can, continue to fight Autopilot's forces that are being produced with that extra metal. But yeah, bits of engagements going on across the map here. But as these medium tanks come out, they are a little bit slower. Since they are a little bit beefier, you want to be a little bit more careful with them. You don't want to just throw them away. So both players here kind of respecting each other a little bit, trying to find free damage instead of just throwing them in there and dying. And that's very, very important. I see a lot of new players just kind of like, well, I got an army here, they got an army here, let's just, we're going to just fight, and that's how it is, But, you got to think about, where do the Rex lie from that fight? Whether or not you can take the fight is not the only consideration. Because whoever gets control of that Rex field can, resurrect those units, reclaim those units, get some extra metal or just extra units, and, that can certainly turn the tides in a very big way if it's, a lot of forces. Autopilot gets a bit surrounded here, but at the same time has a few reinforcements. But I think the extra damage from these pawns is certainly going to help out a lot as Blodir takes a more efficient trade here. Yeah, the game, like I was saying, slowing down a little bit. I'm kind of waiting for transitions. Okay, there is a T2 transition from Blodir. No transition yet from Autopilot. But yeah, with this, going to be able to start upgrading these mexes, start producing things like bulls, jaguars, and build up a bigger force. And those units especially, they're extra big, they're extra expensive. They're stronger, but at the same time, they leave behind bigger Rex, so your engagements need to be even more careful, as this game progresses. But yeah, Jaguar's out now. Jaguars trade pretty well with medium tanks. It's pretty even, but at the same time, they do have anti-air capabilities. They aren't terribly expensive, so losing a few isn't that bad. But yeah, Banshee's now coming down, looking like they want to take out these 3.0 mexes at the bottom left here. And yeah, even fighters to defend them. So yeah, I think these 3.0 mexes and the Khan are probably going to go down. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit because those are, in fact, exploiters. But yeah, Bull is out now on this left-hand side. Going to be able to push back this force of medium tanks. The medium tanks could maybe like split up. Some half could go this way, half could stay and make sure that the bulls stay in this position. But yeah, just like little things like that can certainly help deal with you know, bigger units like these bulls. Like it's harder to have them, you know, be in all these different positions because, you know, they are so much more expensive. You can't have as many of them out. At the top here, we do have another engagement here. There is a bull here as well. And yeah, that's gonna just push Autopilot away. So, you know, I think it's kind of, you know, time for both players to just kind of go T2 here. Autopilot now adding on, you know, a T2 lab of their own, you know, has a constructor out, you know, working up some T2 mexes, even building on a fusion here, you know, realizing that their energy, you know, could certainly use it. They have a lot of solar panels here that could be reclaimed once that's finished. And yeah, I think, you know, the T2 transition here from Autopilot's pretty good. You know, I think just staying on T1 a little bit longer allows you to work up some extra units, allows you to like maybe try to apply pressure, but at the same time makes it very difficult for the early stages of T2 to apply pressure. So this is going to allow both players to just kind of build up a little bit, you know, sit tight, and, you know, to work up a bit more of a macro game. And I say that, but there are, you know, plenty of medium tanks out here in the center, you know, trying to fight these bulls. But yeah, going to be forced back. Unable to do too much here. Well, I say that, but maybe he's going to go for it. He's going to go for these bulls. I think this is a tricky thing for these medium tanks, though, because, you know, they don't really deal a lot of damage, and bulls certainly have a lot of health. So I think these players just kind of trading places, actually, instead. These medium tanks now moving up towards the top. The bulls, you know, moving more... Well, maybe not moving, but maybe wanting to move into a position to guard that that area. But yeah, these bulls and this army from the top now going to reconvene to deal with that. But that does allow Autopilot to start moving his forces up there as well. But yeah, these players are just kind of feeling out the positions of your enemy forces, you know, and seeing what is possible. You know, it's kind of poking around. I think that's a very important thing to do, to just kind of see what your opponent's doing, where the forces are being moved to, you know, and maybe getting close enough to, you know, fully see the army, but also far enough away that you're, you know, respecting your opponent, and making sure you're not, you know, losing units for free here. So looks like Blodir, you know, now deciding he has enough units together here, can maybe, you know, push in here. There's only so many medium tanks to defend this location, and I think this is actually a pretty strong move here, especially if he starts moving to the right. You know, pushing in this direction cuts off this entire top area, makes it easy for him to maybe swing up here with forces, or maybe send different, you know, a different band of units over to that location, take out those mexes, and now this entire region is being threatened just by these units being in this position. But there are some medium tanks still in that area. Looks like instead of defending the area, they're looking to push forward up the hill, you know, maybe see if, you know, Blodir isn't paying attention and deal with it that way. Some Banishers and Czars are out now, you know, and Banishers are certainly going to force this army away. They can trade very effectively with things like bulls, things like medium tanks, things that are a little bit more expensive here. But yeah, I think these medium tanks are certainly going to do some damage up here. You know, and take out this position. You know, Blodir just trying to do it with medium tanks, or sorry, do it with just Jaguars and bulls alone makes it very difficult to deal with this. You know, I'm not sure if Armada has the right tools to deal with this kind of play. You kind of need to like sit back and be a little bit more defensive maybe, but at the same time maybe not realizing that there were units at that top location. But yeah, meanwhile, the top right here under threat as those units that were in the like more center region here move up to the top right location. There was some units moving down here at the bottom as well, but they run into this Czar, they run into these Tigers, and, you know, decide to run back and not leave behind these big bull wrecks. But yeah, these medium tanks, you know, at the top left have taken out a significant portion of the economy here. And now the Self-D did not leave wrecks behind, you know, seeing that there are plenty of defenders here. And certainly a good choice. I don't think he's going to be able to do much damage besides what he's already done. So, you know, a pretty smart move here from Autopilot. Oh, that's unfortunate. I say unfortunate because, you know, these are 3.0 mexes. That's certainly a big deal. And, you know, maybe getting a bull up here to take that out would be a good choice. but also just kind of needing these bulls to keep these medium tanks in their place. I think it's, probably a smarter move overall, considering, you don't want to continuously bleed out in that location. And yeah, just reinforcing it with some more bulls up there. Maybe going to swing through here once again and then pinch this army eventually. But Autopilot doing a very nice job at the bottom position here. Just sending units around, and it's fairly uncontested right now. These Tigers are fairly cheap. They're only $600, 665 metal. So certainly a lot cheaper than the bulls that are 1,000 metal. Allows Autopilot to just like do things like that, like swing around, take out a position while moving his bigger, beefier units like these Tsars up here to prevent, the defense coming in to, take those Tigers out. But yeah, I think Autopilot here overall in a very good position, and just controlling more of the map, has plenty of plenty of fighters out for anti-air, so no bombing can really happen for Blodir. So it's kind of like, what does Blodir even do here? I think this is a very difficult position for him to be in. Especially since we see things like these Banishers getting a lot of nice damage on these bulls. That homing shot is certainly a very, very big deal. And it kind of begs the question of, what does Armada do against those Banishers, against those Tsars? And, to put it that way, it's like, well, your choice really falls into Starlights. You need to have Starlights to deal, big amounts of damage to these beefy units. And they certainly have the range to deal good damage to things like Banishers, things like Tsars. But they're a little bit less mobile. You can't really be around the map, like Autopilot has been. And so you kind of need to position them in the chokes and just guard those chokes, right? So I would think that Blodir would probably be going into that. Looks like instead of doing that, going into T2 Air Lab to maybe try to, get a fighter dominance here. Looks like Autopilot doing the same thing, getting that Tier 2 Air Lab, adding on anti-nuke, countermeasures as well to prevent spy bots from EMPing anything at the base. Certainly a nice addition here. Just, playing it safe, making sure that nothing crazy happens to lose them the game. A nuke can certainly turn the tides in a very, very big way, even in a 1v1. So you do have to be very careful eventually. And I think maybe just looking at like how many forces are out here from Blodir, realizing he's like pretty good on units, kind of afraid of, or I guess I should say, posing the question to himself, like, okay, I'm in a good position with fighters. I'm in a good position with ground forces. What can my opponent do to rapidly change the game into their favor? And of course, one of the things that can stick out is nuke. You don't see a lot of nukes in 1v1s, but and you don't see them because they're so very expensive. But realizing that Blodir doesn't have too many ground forces, might be Autopilot might be thinking to himself, what is Blodir up to? I don't see enough forces here to contend with my ground forces, so let's just be a little cautious. Let's be safe, get that anti-nuke going, and all that. Blodir looking to do the same thing, knowing that they're behind and thinking, well, a nuke would just certainly, end the game. I need to think about like all these different possibilities that my opponent could be doing. I don't see a ton of ground forces for them either. So I think both players just kind of like going so heavily into air, kind of just shows like, their opponents are kind of thinking like, okay, what could this person be spending all that extra money on, not knowing that there's so many air units. And I say that, but now each player knows, exactly how many fighters and stuff out for each other, or how many fighters are out for their opponent. With Autopilot, in a way, kind of overproducing the air units. And it makes me wonder, like, are they going to do some kind of bombing play? Are they going to do some kind of gunship play? With all that spending, or I should say, with all the extra fighters and stuff that they have. And if not, is this maybe an over expenditure on fighters? But yeah, I think Autopilot, or I should say, sorry, Blodir, maybe going to add on some, static anti-air defenses, to help deal with that excessive fighter count, to make sure that he doesn't get bombed and things like that. And then also, this also begs the question: does Autopilot maybe just transition out, knowing that there's ground anti-air? you know, ground anti-air can't really threaten. You know, it makes it very difficult for the player to have enough on the ground to defend against ground forces, but also means that they're not going to have as many fighters out probably, and that means that, you know, things like bombers, you know, are a little bit more out of the question. So, you know, does Autopilot transition out of that air lab? Actually, it looks like they instead sold the T2 vehicle lab, and I wonder what they're going to do instead. Like, is this going to be a T3 transition? Maybe instead, or maybe they're just going to go, okay, yeah, it is a T3 transition. I was wondering if maybe they're going to put all their eggs into this, you know, T2 air lab, but instead, yeah, going with that T3 lab. And yeah, Autopilot's Cortex, so he's going to be able to build some Shivas here. Shivas, of course, you know, just kind of a really powerful, rather cheap T3 unit that you kind of mass up, and then, you know, you don't want to just show it one at a time. You kind of want to ball them up and then show all at once and say like, hey, I got this big powerful force, I'm going to deal with it. You know, maybe, you know, push them through a location where your opponent's, you know, has a hard time dealing with them because you just don't know that they exist until it's too late. But that is going to allow, you know, Blodir to gain some ground here in the meantime. Going to be able to push some bulls forward since there aren't that many forces out here for Autopilot. So, you know, we're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out. But yeah, I mean, there are plenty of banishes out here, so I think, you know, in this position at least, there's no real push potential for Blodir unless they add on some Starlights here. At the bottom position, though, maybe could push through here, but I don't know. I guess just seeing that there's so many Tigers, you know, seeing some Scorpions, maybe decides like, okay, you know, now's maybe not the time. I want to be a little bit more efficient with my trades and let them come to me. And yeah, I would think that, yeah, Starlight Productions actually is starting. I was just going to say they should maybe consider adding on some Starlights, but they already beat me to it. But yeah, Starlight's certainly going to be a very useful tool against these Banishers, against these Zars, and even the Shivas. Not that Blodir knows that they're on the way, but you know, certainly a good tool for that as well. So, you know, I wonder how Autopilot's going to, you know, look at the situation, and is he going to transition out of Shivas into something else, or are they just going to say like, well, I'm going to keep doing Shivas, but, you know, attack these different locations, making it difficult for your Starlights to keep up. You know, and all that. So another thing to consider is, actually, I'm maybe forgetting, and I'm curious. I think the Shivas can go through the pond. I could be mistaken with that, though. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember if they can go through this pond or not. Actually, they should be able to. Aren't they considered amphibious? Yeah, they're considered amphibious, so they can certainly walk straight through the center here and get into the base of their opponent. So something to consider as well. But anyways, the time is now. The Shivas are being revealed as these bulls push forward. And yeah, I think that's kind of gonna like hard counter this in a way. The Shivas can certainly do some nice damage to these bulls from a distance with the missiles that they have. But then, you know, if the bulls try to do an actual engagement with them, you know, the Shivas have a very powerful regular cannon as well. So I think Blodir here needs to be very careful, especially since it looks like these Tigers have pushed through here, took out those bulls at the bottom apparently. And this is certainly going to be some damage in the back of the base here as these Starlights come out. It's really nice to have one, but at the same time, you know, they're slow. It's hard to get them into position. And I think these Tigers, you know, just going to keep pushing forward, possibly up the hill, possibly take out some of these fusions, because these Starlights are going to trail behind too much. And I say that, but it looks like these bulls might get picked off in time. Looks like a bunch of gunships coming in here now. Going to be able to come help take care of this a little quicker. So yeah, this is going to certainly shut down the Tigers here. But yeah, those Shivas now moving through the center of the map, going directly into Blodir's base. I think this might be the end, because this is certainly a lot of Shivas to deal with. It looks like for now, just 4 Starlights, 5th Starlight here, going to be able to maybe start dealing with this. But I guess, you know, the Roughnecks here as well. So I don't know, maybe Autopilot decides instead to pull back. In fact, might even lose some Shivas here with the gunships, right? You know, just unable to really push in there because of all these gunships. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of fighters here. for Autopilot too. So, you know, the gunships are no more. So I don't know. You can continue on. Maybe he's going to rethink it. Maybe he can go in from a different angle since the Starlights are now on the coast there. You know, meanwhile, during all this, there is an attack at the top position here. And, you know, this is a formidable force. You know, there's a lot of banishers, and they're going to be able to clean up these bulls pretty easily. But yeah, I you know, not being careful enough, some of these banishers getting a little too close to these bulls, taking some damage. But I think, you know, with all these banishers and these czars coming up, you know, going to be able to take out the defending bulls and continuing on up here. Commander is coming over here into position to, you know, degun the place. But we'll see how that works out. Meanwhile, you know, plenty of fighters out still for Autopilot. You know, Shivas have transitioned to moving over to this left-hand position. You know, and even adding on some wasps to help deal with these ground forces. And yeah, I think this is just overwhelming for you know, Blodir. You know, the Starlights have moved into position to defend against these Shivas, but at the same time, these gunships can deal with the Starlights. And it looks like, yeah, the commander, I apologize, I missed it. The commander went down, probably trying to degun this army here. And, you know, that's it. That's the game. But wow, what a long
battle ended.
Well, I guess it started off as a macro game, but, you know, there's plenty of you know, things that were happening throughout that match. Need to kind of catch my breath a little bit. But there is a second game, of course, so we'll load that up. So I want to remind everyone that this is the losers finals. The losers of this set will be the third place in this Alpha Cup, and the winner will move on to the grand finals to face off against X Factor. And then I also want to remind people that it is indeed a rematch between these two. Blodir won the first set in the winners bracket against Autopilot, you know, which knocked him down into the losers bracket. And you know, Blodir, you know, was taken out by X Factor in the semifinals, and now, you know, once again facing off against Autopilot. All right, our game is nice and loaded. Let's get into it.
Game started.
All right. At the bottom right, we have Autopilot as our blue Armada player. And at the top left, we have Blodir as our red Cortex player. This is Desolation. It's a much smaller map, so this is not going to be as much of a macro map. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, is it possible for it to go into a macro game? And I suppose it is. Depending on, you know, how the control lies. But usually, because it's a smaller map, there is a lot of aggression. And, you know, I guess I should also point out, you know, that there's a lot of positions here where vehicles aren't as strong. You know, these are kind of steep hills. And while vehicles, I believe, can go up them, they're, you know, they slow down so much going up them that it's really not something you see a lot of. You primarily see a lot of bots, at least for the opener. Yeah, it's just lots of bots controlling these hills and, you know, cutting the map, you know, maybe even just like that, right? Or, you know, something similar. But yeah, it oftentimes comes down to these, you know, these hills at the bottom left and top right where there are a lot of mexes, right? So, you know, that's something to consider as the game gets closed off. But initially here, we should also talk about just like the kind of pressure you can feel on this map. You know, with these bits of hills here that block radar. I'm not sure if this one does. It should. I think some of it does. But anyways, it can be kind of difficult to get radar. Like if you have a radar down here, it's hard to see what's on this high ground. It's hard to see what's up on this cliff. You know, and that makes it very difficult to defend. So that makes aggression, you know, pretty strong here. So I don't think that this game's going to go on as long as the last one, but we'll just have to wait and find out. But yeah, Autopilot here, you know, just sitting with a lot of winds, no solar, you know, just going with a pretty fast con. Second con just now coming out after these ticks Ticks, of course, coming out to defend, but also, just kind of scout ahead, see what his opponent's up to. Gonna see this Rascal. So I guess that means that Blodir has gone for a vehicle lab here, and actually gone for solar collectors as well. I think this is a rather tricky thing to pull off, especially on a map like this. I mean, so Wind is in a position where, you can do some solars, and if Wind's really not great, maybe you want to do solars, but at the same time, they eat up a lot of metal, and if you're going vehicles, it's hard to have enough metal to produce a lot of vehicles. So I think this is going to be very, very tricky for Blodir, just because of the opener here. These pawns now, or sorry, these grunts out now. These Ticks out now, trying to find some damage. Maybe going to take out this radar. Not the biggest of deals, but at the same time, being blind for a little bit is annoying. I'm going to have to rebuild that. That's another, a little bit of time that the commander's not building, any mexes to increase his economy. And that's certainly a big, important thing for the vehicle player to do. Add on that economy so that they have enough incisors out to deal with all these Ticks and things roaming the map. Autopilot, looking to apply a lot of pressure here, but also having, 3 pawns out, or I'm sorry, 3 cons out here expanding. So, just kind of doing this rapid expansion, and actually I should check to see if, okay, so they do know that Blodir has added on a lot of solar collectors here. So, with that in mind, Autopilot might be thinking like, okay, he can't really afford to have a lot of, a lot of units coming my way if I apply a little bit of pressure, with Ticks and pawns. It's going to be kind of difficult for them. So why don't I just kind of, do a little bit more of a macro thing and have a few more cons out here expanding. I can maybe do a bit more of a naked expand, as long as I have enough pawns over in that region to defend these expansions. Meanwhile, back at Blodir's base, it looks like, this constructor's under threat here. These pawns going straight for it. Looks like the constructor is going to be taken out here. Certainly a big deal. These pawns, of course, abusing their mobility as much as they can, trying to run around in circles, make it so that these incisors can't shoot back, because there's a friendly unit in between them and the pawn, and almost even taking out that construction turret. I think that construction turret went down, like that would have been just GG straight up, but it does survive. But Blodir is in a very, very difficult position here. Just kind of in a position where, they have enough incisors out here to defend, but, building up that incisor ball to be able to lay down some pressure is going to be very, very difficult here. And then just, looking at the expansions also, not having enough cons out expanding, it's going to push them further and further behind as Autopilot, with those 3 cons expanding rather nakedly, are just kind of eating up the map right now. So yeah, I kind of think this might be just like a build order win of like, well, wind was low and vehicles were, too slow to build up any substantial numbers here. And that just is going to mean Blodir gets 3rd place and Autopilot's, takes the win. This is a best of 3. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but, Blodir only has this one chance to take down Autopilot, before getting knocked out. So, the pressure is on, and this is a rather tricky situation to be in. So, he's got to play his cards just right here. And so I just, of course, trying to move into position to, shoo these pawns away. He just needs to expand so carefully. Autopilot, even moving all the way up to the hill at this point, grabbing the mexes up here. Probably, a radar as well. Radar very important up here to just see what's ahead in this location, since the low ground radar doesn't cover that. Let's see, does he have units over here? No, okay, this con hasn't quite gotten that far, but at the same time, just kind of in a more forward position, grabbing more and more mexes. And even having this con in the center, grabbing this stuff is really nice as well. Blodir doing what they can to section off this middle location. One of the things that I tend to really like trying to do on this map is I try to get my commander, if I'm able to get my commander into this position, start building LTs here, and all of a sudden this high ground is a free expansion as long as I can keep that, safe, with that forward defense there. But it's going to really be up to the players, or it's going to be up to Autopilot to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. It looks like Blodir, is moving their commander into that position. Actually, in fact, looking to just secure the high ground here instead of trying to section off this bigger gap. Meanwhile, at the bottom right, or sorry, bottom left, we do have some pawns coming in here, trying to find some damage. Looks like the engagement, go into the incisor player though, as it usually does in these smaller numbers. Yeah, I think plenty of forces out here for Blodir to, section this off, but also not enough forces to really push in here either. The attacker is usually at a bit of a disadvantage because, as units retreat, they have a little bit more range. It's a little bit harder to engage with them. And the defending player has radar, sees exactly what's coming towards them, knows what they need to do to, position correctly to take a better engagement. But yeah, these incisors now moving up the hill, going to be threatening this Khan that's moving up here. Pawns moving into position to defend, but at the same time, I don't think that they are... Okay, I think he's just kind of saying like, well, this is enough incisors, I can't really fight it. So I'm going to let them have this, but also position my pawns in the back to maybe, prevent them from going any further. But yeah, actually, it looks like, Blodir kind of just takes the win and starts retreating out of that position. I think that's a really strong, important move to make because, the further you go in there, the closer it is to Autopilot's base, the closer it is and easier it is for Autopilot to resurrect and apply that pressure later on. And, on this kind of map where it's a little bit smaller, and there's only so many mexes, a few extra units because they have resbots, resurrecting those incisors is certainly a very, very big deal. So just Blodir being very, very careful with the situation. Pawns now trying to actually push through here a little bit. Sees there are the incisors still up there, so each player just kind of respecting each other's position a little bit, making sure that nothing gets through, but also making sure that's their opponent is moving around, defending any kind of attack that they might lay down. Lots of pawns moving up to this high ground here. Blodir does have his commander up here. This is a tricky position here. This commander can get caught by all these pawns. This is 23 pawns, and it's going to maybe come down to D-guns, but Blodir doesn't have a ton of energy banked up right now. Only on 2,500, now worked up to 3,000, saving up a bit of energy. But look at the spread. This is a nice spread from Autopilot, and looks like maybe they do engage with this commander. D-guns are pretty good so far, taking out a lot of units. This commander not taking that much damage. Pawns, oh wow. Okay, so... a lot of the pawns get taken out, but the few that remain, nice flanking damage on that commander, and it goes down. That's, it's really tricky. I think, that's going to wrap up this set, and Blodir, gets the third place, and Autopilot, moves on to the grand finals. But just to talk a little bit exactly about what happened there, you might at first be looking at that saying like, oh, that's plenty of pawns, the command's going to go down, and then you see the D-guns go off, and it's like, wow, the D-guns really take out a lot of pawns, and then all of a sudden it looks like, well, surely, these 10 pawns that survive are not going to be enough, but then it's like, they're so spread out that it's like you need one D-gun per pawn, and at that point, it's just too much for the commander to handle, and the commander goes down, and, it maybe sounds or looks a little funny, but that's actually typically how that happens. It's like when you have masses of pawns, they're so easy to D-gun like big swabs of them, and then you lose a big chunk of them, but then the few that remain are able to actually take down the commander. But yeah, what a game. I guess Blodir, I forget what maps they played on previously, but Blodir just not having what it takes to take down Autopilot for a second time. Maybe Autopilot getting a kind of warming up in that first game, or first set, I should say, and now kind of showing his true skill, able to take out Blodir. And then certainly at the same time, this tournament was a bit later than it used to be. So, maybe Blodir getting a little bit tired, maybe it's a little bit past his bedtime or something like that. And stuff happens, and maybe you just don't have you don't have it in you to move forward. But yeah, that concludes the set. I hope you guys enjoyed the cast. Next up, we'll be doing the grand finals between Autopilot and X Factor. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.